Hey everybody, this is Razib Khan with Conversation number 59, and I am here with my usual partner in crime, but not literal crime, just metaphorical crime, Josiah Neely of R Street, and I'm obviously Razib Khan, and I'm here with Jeremy R. Carl, or Jeremy Carl the Younger, maybe as I like to think, because I do know your father, and he was on my podcast talking about the unprotected class. I think it was last year now. And I've known your dad for a while, and I have actually met you in your younger years. Now that you are a grand old man, though, we decided to get you on the podcast because you've been making some waves. So you have been commenting a little bit about politics and religion from your own perspective, um, and you had an interaction with Vivek Ramaswamy, erstwhile presidential candidate, right now running for governor in Ohio, about religion, Christianity, Hinduism, these sorts of things. And it kind of prefigured some of the conversations that are actually happening now. And as we are recording, just for the listener to give some context, this is, I think, Diwali was the first day of Diwali was yesterday. I don't actually know how many days it is. Sorry, I'm ignorant about this sort of stuff. Not gonna lie. But so President Trump had a Diwali day, just he recorded something to celebrate Diwali and wished Hindus good Diwali, and a bunch of other politicians did as well. And obviously, Kash Patel, who is a Hindu, tweeted something out about Diwali, as did I think Harmeet Dillon as well. She's Sikh, but it's close enough. And they have similar celebration, I think. Uh, and other people were pushing back that's not appropriate for American government. We're a Christian nation, whatnot. Interestingly, I do have to say JD Vance did not tweet anything about Diwali, and JD is married to a Hindu woman. Actually, Usha is a Hindu, so that was interesting. So we have like a lot of cultural currents here, and a lot of like different threads to this to talk about. I
Well,
guess
you
before.
missed one,
Oh,
Razine. Stephen Miller didn't tweet anything about it either, even
oh
though.
yeah, we don't want to get into that theory. Well, you know what? Like, I don't want to that exposure. Just Google pictures of Stephen Miller with his wife. That's all I'm gonna like. That's what I'm gonna ask the listeners and the viewers to do. Just Google the picture and see if it doesn't seem suspicious. And Google the picture of JD with his wife and look at the couples. Just look at them and tell me what you think. That's all I gotta say. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything. Use your eyes. Use your eyes and use your mental faculties there. But anyway, yeah. So I'm just kind of setting the stage there. Josiah, do you have anything to say before we let Jeremy speak?
No, not really. I think you set it up brilliantly there.
All right. Well, I mean, thank you for complimenting my brilliance. So, Jeremy, um, can you just like introduce yourself in terms of like where you stand, like where you come from? And I know you're. I'll just like tell the listeners and the viewers, you are a Reformed Christian, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that's a very very particular type of American Christianity, although it is in the mainstream back to the founding of the colonies, not even the Republic. Many of the original New England colonists were of Calvinist background, so Reformed Christianity associated with Calvinism, particular theology, and today, arguably, I mean the Presbyterian Church, which I think like you are uh, officially still you're officially affiliated with a Presbyterian church. And I'm going to say a because there are multiple different
I
Presbyterian churches
assume
in the
it's.
United States that are very distinctive, but their genealogy always goes back to the Reformed tradition. And so I want to put that as a context. So that's a very particular tradition that has particular views on things like soteriology, salvation, but also the proper, I think, like way of governance and relationship, arguably between church and state. And so, can you talk about what you asked Vivek Ramaswamy and what you were trying to get across? Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a Hindu, a Vedanta or Advaita adherent to that particular philosophical tradition, who claimed he was a monotheist, and I think that sort of thing has gotten under some people's skin. So we've been talking a lot. So like, why don't you have your piece out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I confronted Vivek at a Turning Point USA event we had here in Bozeman, Montana, at Montana State University, and I just confronted him basically on his ability to be conservative, coming from a different religious background than this nation. I basically questioned that he can't be conserving anything. I also questioned his religion in terms of representing Ohio, which is an extremely religious state. 64% of the population identify as Christian, and how he felt he could represent those people coming from a different background and faith.
Yeah, and like, how did he respond?
Yeah, so he responded by with the usual kind of straw man type response that I get. To that those types of comments, which is he brought up the fact that Thomas Jefferson was a deist, and he brought up the disputed statement that Ben Franklin was a deist to kind of back the fact that in the foundation of this country, he feels that there isn't any religious foundation. And he came at it from a condescending angle as well. He kind of asked, he's like, "Oh, do you know who Thomas Jefferson was?" Pretty silly question if you ask me. I think most people do. And then he
Well,
asked
did you go to
if
public
I know.
school? Did you go to a
That's
public
fair.
school?
That's a fair
I
point.
didn't go to a public school, so maybe it is a
Okay, well
fair
then you
question with
probably
that
do know who he
context.
is. But yeah,
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, he just asked if I knew who those people were, kind of condescendingly. He told me that I should read U.S. history instead of talking about it. And I just think he came from a very he brought up a lot of questionable facts, questionable statements that were very opinionated that I would disagree with about the foundation of this country, where he kind of talked about the lack of a religious code in its foundation.
All right, Josiah, do you have anything to say to that?
well, I mean, it's an interesting question. Of course, uh, the country at the time of the founding and even before was a overwhelmingly, I wouldn't even say just a Christian country, but like a Protestant country. There were, of course, there were Catholics there, and I
Yeah, I mean, I
assume
mean, I mean, let's call it spade a spade. It was an Anglo-Protestant country,
was it
right?
right? Yeah, yeah,
Very
yeah.
traditional, a particular type of Protestantism, like whether it's like the Anglican establishment in the South that was mostly Episcopalian, and then in the North you had Congregationalism that came out of Calvinism, Puritanism, right? But go on.
Right. Yeah. And there were, I mean, I think Charles Carroll, signer
Yeah,
of the Declaration of Independence, was
there,
Catholic.
there was a there was a
Right.
token number of Jews and a token number of Catholics, Roman Catholics.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I mean, this is my understanding is that even though the country was, overwhelmingly Protestant, because Protestants don't agree with each other. Either you had splits between like Anglicans and Congregationalists or whatever, and so they thought it was important. For that reason, they didn't want the federal government in particular to be dominated by a particular
Yeah.
Protestant sect, and so you have things in there like no religious. You can't have a religious test for federal office, right?
Yeah.
Say, or then even in the uh, First Amendment, saying the Congress can't establish a religion,
Yes.
which at the time would have. I mean, states were allowed if they wanted to
Which
establish.
most of the states had, not all of them. I think maybe Rhode Island didn't, but
Mm-hmm.
Right.
most of the states did. So just to be clear here, let's establish the historical context and assume that there are people out there who haven't read the history. Okay, so basically, the vast majority of the states, I think everything but Rhode Island, had an established church. In the 18th century. In the 18th century, they eventually started shifting away from that. At the end of the 18th century, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison were actually part of that in Virginia, and so in the South they were mostly Anglican. In the North, in New England, they were Congregationalist churches mostly. I don't actually think New York might not have had one because it was already pluralistic. The problem is if you're going to have a national church in the United States, the federal government, think about it. The different states, and like we were very very focused on being distinct states. Um, had different established churches. So which one do you pick? So in England, it's very straightforward at the time. There was a minority of Protestants within England who were not Anglican, but it was the dominant tradition and it was the religion of the monarchy. And it's still the established church officially. We can talk about what it is, in a practical way. But so there's a problem there. Patrick Henry, the founder, did propose kind of a more like generic, non-denominational, assertion that we were a Christian country, officially at the federal level. Uh, the context here that I would say, Jeremy, though, is obviously, and as Josiah just said, it was a predominantly Christian country. It was a predominantly Anglo-Protestant country, and obviously they didn't anticipate that that would change in any fundamental way, despite their theological differences, which the founders had with each other, and the different states had in terms of their denominational orientation, whether you're Arminian or Calvinist or whatnot. But they were very radical actually at the time in abjuring an official established uh, church, right? And that was the radical view. A lot of Europeans were shocked and kind of outraged, and like were like, "How is this going to work? Like, you don't have an official church. How are you going to bind the people together?" But the different states already had different orientations, and I think that's the way that you could think about it as the founding in terms of like where we are now. That was taken in various directions, obviously, and we today here are at a very different point than we were. So people often say we're a Christian nation. We don't. They don't say we're a Protestant nation. Like some of the people maybe Jeremy might say that because Catholics, like Josiah here, are just considered regular part of the American Christian body politic now. This was obviously very, 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 very controversial in the 19th century. Even though Catholics were, given freedom, they were such a small minority that until the Irish arrived and later the German Catholics, it was not a big political problem, right? And so I think that we have evolved as a country, and I guess some people would say that Vivek Ramaswamy's monotheistic Hinduism is part of that evolution. Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you get is a slippery slope, and I think that's what a lot of the very very hardcore Protestants in the 19th century were kind of concerned about. Because yeah, I mean, absolutely, Catholics are Christians, and they've been accepted into the American Christian realm as well. However, what we see is that slippery slope kind of leading to, okay, now we're accepting monotheistic Hindus. Now we're accepting Muslims, and it's not that those people should just be totally exiled from society, but elected as state officials. I mean, I think we're definitely starting to see the consequences of that with people like Ilhan Omar, and the kind of the Muslim conquest of the Midwest, that we're seeing right now. And so, yeah, like the founding fathers, when they made that religious accommodation, as Josiah was talking about, it's to accommodate all the vastly different theological beliefs of the Anglo-Protestant people living in the 13 colonies. And the other reason you see that is because America was founded on this idea of like states acting very independently, and the freedom of religion, separation of church and state that we hear about, that is on a federal level. The lack of religious tests, that is on a federal level, and so that is in order to allow states to exercise their states' rights, which was a huge matter of debate at the time. Obviously, we see with the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, and all that kind of stuff. You see a massive difference between the kind of views of how much independence should states have. And so, what the Constitution is kind of allowing for is for states to choose for themselves. It's protecting states' rights in their religion, not forbidding a nationalized religion. Not it's forbidding a nationalized denomination, but not forbidding a nationalized or states having their own religion.
Yeah, yeah. Although to be clear, like just as I said, Patrick Henry did propose just a generic like Christian affirmation, right? And that was still rejected. I mean, that would have been kind of like a little strange actually at the time, because if you think of like all the German states had their own very particular. It was a big deal when the House of Hohenzollern, no, the Hohenzollern, yeah, the Prussian royal house, they switched from Lutheran to Reformed, right? It was a big
Mm-hmm.
deal, and and then when in the 19th century when the Lutherans and the Reformed were merged together by Prussia, that's how the Missouri Synod Church emerged. They were like a bunch of German Lutherans that left Germany because they were not going to be worshiping with those nationally reformed, right? Um,
Right.
so I mean, I do wonder if Patrick Henry, like today, Patrick Henry's idea is actually what a lot of conservative Christians want. Like it totally makes sense now, but in the 18th century, it's a little ahistorical. People were a little too particularistic, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's what you see is like because people back then it was very typical for for people to really know their theology. A lot of the words we're using right now, Calvinist, Arminian, Presbyterian, Congregationalist, those words mean nothing to 95% of Americans. Those words don't mean things to a lot of people within the church. Um,
Yeah.
and so that being proposed at the time would have been very offensive. Now we kind of see non-denominationalism and kind of a lack of affiliation with a specific theological belief as a very normalized idea. But at the time, I think that would have been considered very offensive, especially to a lot of like the kind of religious zealot type people that had fought in the revolution, that were voting, that were forming the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go
You
on.
want to go on? Okay. Yeah.
All
So
right, just really
yeah.
quickly, I want to correct myself a little bit. Well, not totally correct, but I'll by like about 1780. A lot of the states had actually disestablished, like Virginia, New
Right.
York, Maryland, Georgia. It was like between 17, it was like the last quarter of the 18th century that a lot of it happened, and then the last states were like Connecticut in the 1830s. I just want to put that on the record.
I
Okay,
think
go on,
South
Joseph.
Carolina maybe also had a late one, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, it was removed. I'm looking at it. It declared the Christian Protestant religion the state religion in 1778, switching from Anglican, and then they removed it from 1790 Constitution. Anyway,
Mhm.
go on.
And there were also I think that a number of states, even though they didn't have an established religion, they did have some sort of like general religious affirmation for like office holders, right? Whether it was like a general Christian affirmation or it might have just even been a belief in God or something like that.
Yeah, because the religious test,
Uh,
as Jeremy said, is like that's applying to the federal offices.
Correct, yeah, and that even like that's even though that's the way it was originally, of course, during the 20th century, the Supreme Court, through all sorts of complicated legal maneuvering, which we don't have to get into the details of, kind of applied that federal standard to the states too. So now, formally, you could not have in Ohio or in another state, a religious bar where you say someone couldn't be an office holder because they belong to a certain religion. But what has always been true, I think, it was true in the founding, true now, is that's a matter of law. People, of course, can vote for who they want for pretty much any reason. And so, even though there were no explicit religious tests back at the time of the founding, it's pretty inconceivable that that a Catholic could have been elected president, let alone practicing Hindu, or someone of some other religion.
Yeah,
Um, you know,
yeah. Well, let me make this distinction, or like just this, because like it was something Jeremy said earlier. So I will say, some of all of the founding fathers, pretty much. I mean, I think there was a couple of Catholics, but they all pretty much came from the Anglo-Protestant cultural background. And if they were not very religious or churchgoers themselves, there was a church they were raised or their family was generally part of, right? So, what we use the term like cultural Christian, like they were all clearly cultural Christians, cultural Protestants, right? But there was a wide range in orthodoxy. So, I mean, Thomas Paine was not really a founding father because he went back to Europe. But Paine is like at one extreme. Maybe Jefferson at that founding time was very close to him, being like kind of heterodox, like in terms of their views, which would not be like, frankly, that different in a lot of ways from like Vivek, in terms of how heterodox they were. But they were still from a culturally Christian background, right? And so, I think that there's two ways we can think about this. There's people that are like, so for example, Donald J. Trump. He's from mainline Protestant background. He's obviously cultural Christian. Is he is he a strongly religious Christian? I think like not really, But like nobody's like, oh, like you're a heathen or whatever. You know what I'm saying? You know that like Christianity is a religion that he's familiar with, and that's the religion that he would like go back to if he became like a very religious person, right? I mean, do you think that that's an important distinction, Jeremy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Trump is a really great example of that. What you kind of brought up there is that I would say, I mean, I can obviously not definitively speak about if he is Christian, but I think I can fairly firmly say that he's probably not. He identifies as a Christian. He hangs out with a lot of Christians. But what we see from him is he was able to gain the Christian vote because Christians knew that he was going to represent them to at least some extent. We are going to see him push back against hardcore LGBTQ ideology. We're going to see him push back a little bit, maybe on abortion, not on IVF, right? And so that's where we see, controversial, and he's not going to get the full support of Christians, and he probably isn't a Christian himself. However, he is representative of Christian values in a lot of ways in what he wants with the government. He wants to nationalize our industry, something that Christians want to see. He wants to reduce taxes, something that Christians want to see, at least those who have looked into the theology kind of behind that. And so I think that is a really important distinction to make. And I also think that the fact that Trump is from that culture makes a big difference than somebody like Vivek, because Vivek is from a completely different cultural background. He has the Hindu values that he has are going to, whether he realizes it or not, steer his political beliefs. And it's kind of a slippery slope because, a year ago, most guys on the right would have pointed at Vivek and said, look at him. He's the young conservative guy that we love to see. He's pushing really hard for conservatives. He's fighting wokeness. And now we're seeing a bunch of pushback towards him because I think he's kind of gotten slightly less conservative. Obviously, he was very controversial around immigration in the last couple months. And so you're starting to see conservative pushback. And I would argue that all kind of ends up falling onto his religious beliefs, affecting every single part of his life, because that's what religion is it's something that influences every single part of your life. It influences your politics, your culture, the way you interact with other people. And so what we see with Vivek is he's been influenced by Hinduism, whereas somebody like Trump, somebody like Jefferson, both of whom would kind of be considered heretics by Orthodox Christianity, behave like Christians, and they've been influenced by Christianity.
Yeah. What do you think, Josiah?
Well, one would hope that religion would influence your your views, although there seem to be quite a few counterexamples in politics. But one thing I wonder. So first, just to finish my thought from before, ultimately, even though there's no like legal requirement or whatever, it's kind of up to voters to kind of decide what is and what isn't relevant. And in the past, I think they definitely, would have considered that highly relevant. Even today, if you do polling or whatever, I don't know. I don't know that I've seen polling about Hinduism in particular, but I know, for example, there are a lot of people who say they would not vote for a Muslim candidate for president or an atheist candidate.
Mormon, president. Although they did, Romney actually
some
kind
people
of broke that.
Well, maybe a little. Although I know various people who said they would not vote for Romney because of his Mormon faith or whatever. So, and probably, I mean, my guess would be that there's maybe a lesser standard if you're talking about a governor than the president. Some people, would be more willing perhaps to have the governor, not share their faith or the faith of the majority of the country or whatnot. So, I mean, so it's really like, on one thing, it's a question like, I can't imagine that it's going to help Vivek, but how much it hurts him remains to be seen. I guess my question is, to the question of like, can he represent, or anyone who, who is not a Christian represent, the values of the country, or conserve the values of the country, even if they don't share those beliefs. And, William F. Buckley, who's not as popular as he once was, but, at one point he said that he thought they were debating what is the connection between conservatism and religion or belief in God. And his perspective was that he thought a conservative could not be anti-religion or anti-God, but that it was possible for someone to be not personally religious, but kind of pro-religion or pro-God, in a public sense, right? I don't know if Trump would fall into that or not, but
yeah, absolutely. And that, sorry, did I cut you off or?
No.
Yeah.
You go ahead. Go ahead.
Go, young
And
man.
absolutely, and that's where I would place Trump is in terms of he is conserving religious values. He is a conservative because he at least represents Christianity to a certain extent. I would argue that Vivek Ramaswamy as a Hindu is against God, and so I would argue he can't be conservative because I don't think that his God is real. And this is my biased opinion from my standpoint. I'm perfectly willing to acknowledge that. But he isn't conservative because he is against God. Because the God of Christianity, the God that founded the ideals that he wanted to conserve, the God that influenced through his religion of Christianity, worshiping the triune God, um, basically those ideals that form this country, the morals that form this country, all come from Christianity. And we see somebody who's coming from a different religion, right? So he is against our God because our God is a jealous God. Says thou shalt have no other gods before me, and that's what we know. And so I would argue that Vivek is against God, and he's not conservative because he's against God.
Yeah, can I? Okay, I'm gonna, two distinct things. I think, like, from a theological perspective, I mean, candidly, like, I have a really hard time arguing with you because it's pretty straightforward in the Bible and the way Christianity has been practiced for, or like, you know, there have been Christian states, well, I don't want to get into arguments with Armenians, but I think Constantine probably was earlier than Armenia. I have suspicions about the Armenian claim that they were the first Christian state, but I don't want to get into that. Okay, this is gonna like trigger. I'm gonna get in trouble.
Okay, yeah. I'll let you finish. I just want to say this is one of those rare circumstances where you mentioned Armenians, and I think, is he talking about the country or the religious opinion? you know,
Oh, well,
He's talking
Armenia
about the
claims to be the
country,
first Christian nation,
right?
right?
Yes, of course.
Like before Constantine, before Constantine, issued the Edict of Milan or whatever. But anyway, in the early fourth century. So there's a certain way Christian polities are. There's a carve out that goes back to, like, well, it was earlier than this, but Saint Augustine articulated a carve out for Judaism uh, in terms of toleration. But traditionally, like, no other religions were tolerated in these Christian nations, right? And obviously, we know the history, like, in the 16th and 17th century, other Christian traditions were not tolerated within particular states. The religion of the ruler was the religion of the ruled. The establishment of Germany. Obviously, that started staying in the 18th century, late 17th century. We need to get into the details. So I think that you're on, like, you're saying, like, some people would say candidly, like, the Vivek worships he. It's not that he doesn't worship God, is he worships the devil. I mean, honestly, that's actually a traditional Christian view, that, like, the gods of other religions are demons. They're deceivers, right? So, I'm just saying, like, I'm not going to dispute that. Like, that's a strong view. What I will say is, when you say that he has different values, that he grew up with Hindu values, I'm actually not totally sure about that. I'm not really sure, like, how Hindu his values really are, because it's a common objection from, like, a lot of traditionalist Catholics that most Catholics in the United States act more like Protestants and think more like Protestants, because even though on paper we are no longer a majority Protestant country, like, we are now, I think we are just now below 50% as we're speaking right now. Culturally, Catholicism, even a lot of Judaism, like Reform Judaism, uh, they were very heavily influenced by the Protestant norms, particularly the low church Protestant norms of this country. And that's how Americans tend to understand religion and religious values. No matter what they say. We were talking about theology earlier. Most Sunni Muslims in this country, I can tell you because I've asked them, they are not very aware that technically they believe in predestination. They talk as if they're Armenians, which, again, like,
The
some
other
listeners
kind
or viewers will, huh?
the
Some
other
listeners,
kind of Armenians, yeah.
yeah. They are Armenians, not Armenians, but Armenians. Okay, Armenians. But do you see what I'm saying? So, I mean, Jeremy Carl. I mean, I'm just saying, like, I understand that Vivek says that this is his religion. I got to take him at his word. But just from the outside perspective, I think a lot of people are strongly shaped by the culture and the people that they grew up with. Whatever they will tell you specifically, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and we see a lot of that with Vivek. I'm not super familiar with the specific strand of Hinduism that he identifies with, but like obviously, firstly, he's monotheistic, which is different from the I think it's like 300 million or something deities that a lot of other Hindus would identify with worshiping. So first thing, like he is always hammering that point home, mentioning to everybody that he's monotheistic, which is I think definitely a sign that obviously Protestantism has influenced him, the way he carries himself, the way he dresses, the way he talks. Absolutely, he has definitely been influenced by the Christian um, faith, the Protestant faith that he was raised around in this country. However, I would argue that in your comparison with Catholics, right? Catholics have been very Protestantized, if
Yeah,
that's a
in
word,
the U.S.
America. And yeah, absolutely true. The difference with that is going to be Catholics and Protestants have so much shared in common, even though obviously we dispute over a million stupid little things. We have holidays, we have community events that we gather around and share together. Hindus don't share those things. There's nothing that is shared in terms of cultural events, especially holidays. I really want to point that out. Holidays are huge, and we're seeing that right now with Diwali, where everybody's really clashing over it. Catholics and Protestants unite over Christmas, and Christmas is this huge part of culture to every single American because our first major groups of immigrants, the Irish Catholics, they came in and they were doing Christmas too, and Protestants were doing Christmas, and Catholics were doing Christmas, and they were able to kind of bond over that, whether it was official or not. We see that having such a massive impact in America. Hindus don't share that. Now, Hindus who come here and still practice Christmas, at least the less, it's fundamentalist types. But at the end of the day, that's not the religious Christmas. Protestants and Catholics bonded over Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, yeah. Go on, Josiah.
Oh, I was just going to say, in defense of Vivek's sincerity, I can't see into the man's soul or whatever, but it is notable to me that, there are a number of other uh, political figures, of Indian subcontinental continental ancestry who have converted, right? And I'm not saying that their conversion is not sincere either, but like that's a clearer path, if you come from a Hindu or a Sikh background or whatever, and you want
Yeah,
to be governor of South Carolina or Louisiana or whatever, is okay. You convert to some form of Christianity, and so it would have been easy enough for Vivek to do that
yeah.
if it wasn't important to him in some respect.
Well,
So
okay.
the fact, yeah,
I'm assuming he's sincere, and like I'm not actually objecting to his interpretation. I'm just like as an outsider because I'm not Christian or Hindu.
right.
Uh, my personal experience when talking to people of like various exotic different religions is like it's quite clear if they're born and raised in the United States or raised in the United States, they have a hard time not being influenced by kind of like Christian congregational views of things, right? I will say that this is a joke that a friend of mine, who's like a very politically connected friend of mine, made was like. Vivek got so popular so quickly. He had to defend his like or his Hindu religion from Christians. That he's kind of gotten stuck with it. Like if he had more slowly eased into politics, he could have like converted
Yeah,
plausibly. But now he's stuck because like he's like,
right.
had to defend the. You know what I'm trying to say? He can't be like. Anyway,
Yeah, he's just stubborn
it's a
about it.
joke. So obviously, like the theological differences are theological differences, I guess. But how what reactions have you gotten from people though when you say someone like, I mean, basically, I think you're saying that a person in that sort of position who rules or like who administers is a position of leadership over a Christian polity, right? Should themselves at least be at least nominal Christians, ideally, probably more ideal, like a believing, confessing Christian, right? So, I mean, what has the reaction been, I guess, out there to what you said?
Yeah, obviously a super mixed bag. Firstly, whenever you say anything that goes after Hinduism or India on the internet, you're going to get a lot of reaction from that crowd because their population is well known on the internet and all over the place. So, obviously, a huge reaction from them, and them kind of cursing Christianity or whatever. And then a lot of support from people in, I guess, what we would say the Christian nationalist community. A lot of pastors and stuff like that have really it kind of brought the top talking point to, okay, Vivek is a Hindu. Is he really conservative? And now everybody's kind of been talking about that with obviously Nayland Haley as well. Had a really, really viral tweet about that kind of going after Vivek. It was on the same day, and so what we're essentially seeing is a reaction of a lot of people realizing this, and then also a lot of Christians, I think, are and coming out against people like myself and people who share those beliefs. And I think there's a lot of people who would say, well, yeah, but like there's separation between church and state, freedom of religion, and so they don't feel any need to have their religion conflate with their politics. Um, and so I think it's been really interesting to see like all the sorts of different reactions. I have Christians criticizing me for being too hateful or exclusionary, and then Indians just going after me in mass, and then a lot of great Christian nationalist guys that I've really looked up to and love to read and listen to them, and they've kind of come out in support and said, yeah, okay, this is an issue. Like here's a great example, and also I think it's opened my eyes to this isn't a small movement. The belief that I hold, while maybe considered controversial and on the fringes, is massively growing, and there's a large number of people who share it.
What is Christian nationalism to you actually? Because this is a term that gets thrown a lot around a lot, especially by the political press. But I just think it's for like, well, candidly, for like liberal journalists, it's just Christians that scare them. But
Yeah,
I mean, you know what I'm trying to
exactly. Right.
say?
And I'm really glad you asked that question because it's a really broad term because you have everybody from theocrats to people who just want abortion to be illegal classified into the Christian nationalist crowd. To me, what it is a couple of things. First of all, I want to see policymaking and lawmaking influenced by Christian beliefs. I don't think that I don't think there's anything wrong or unconstitutional about quoting the Bible verse in the Senate. Like that's totally okay. And then the other thing to me that I think is really crucial to Christian nationalism, in terms of the sect of it that I would consider myself a part of, would be affirmation of the truth, affirmation of Christianity from our political leaders. So people like our president being completely unashamed of saying things that are very, very religious statements. Senators running on the basis of, hey, I'm Christian and the guy I'm running against isn't. But it's not. What it's not is a theocracy with an incredibly strict like denominational government that is influenced and run by the church by some character like the Pope, right? Who we see kind of in medieval Europe has a massive amount of political influence and kind of controls political countries. That's not what Christian nationalism is to me. Christian nationalism is an acknowledgement and a use of the gospel to create the best nation that we possibly can. And I think that's what the founders did. The founders were all Christian nationalists. They obviously were influenced by the Enlightenment, but the Bill of Rights and all these things, where do we get our rights? Thomas Jefferson answers this in the Declaration of Independence. They're from God, and he's totally willing to say that. And everybody's like, yeah, that makes sense. You had pastors, you had reverends fighting alongside the revolutionaries because they understood that we needed God on our side. Like they made an appeal to heaven, right? And that comes from John Locke, to overthrow the kind of corrupt government that is stealing our money. And so, yeah, essentially just not a theocracy with like Handmaid's Tale. It's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Just affirmation of the gospel and seeing that represented in the laws that we have.
But I mean, I think the key here is because obviously Trump says religious things as well, but he also wishes people happy Diwali and other religions. It's the key for you is like a particular preference and maybe exclusion of non-Christian religions, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see our leaders get more theologically sound. Like we have some good Christians up there right now in power in the White House, and people that are affirming the gospel, like Trump in the White House right now. But I'd love for in future years for those guys to become more and more sound. Pete Hegseth is a guy who I think is a really good example of that. He is involved in the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, which is a super solid, hardcore like Christian nationalist conservative denomination. And he's kind of represented that through a lot of the bills he's been, or not bills, I guess rule changes he's made in our military recently. And so, yeah, like there is a distinction. I would love to see the people that we have as Christians in our government be more sound, because frankly, a bunch of like super normie evangelical types isn't what I'm
Yeah.
looking for either. That's, to me, I mean, honestly, it's essentially what we have right now. We have a lot of Catholics and a lot of, modernist, non-denominational Christians. I mean, I don't think that's working out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
I do have to say, I was surprised. Just really quickly, Josiah, I was surprised by some of the people that were. So I think like Joel Weebon, who is a kind of online like Christian nationalist influencer, reform guy. I think his church is actually in Georgetown, north of where me and Josiah and I are. Um, he tweeted like go back and worship your sand gods or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that like got a lot of. And I said like it should be jungle gods, but anyway, we don't want to get. But anyway, Eric Erickson, co-founder of Red State, pretty kind of a boomer con, I guess, in a way, but evangelical Christian. He was actually angry by that tweet. So I was a little surprised that even some evangelicals are saying like, you shouldn't speak that way. I will also say some of the things with the Diwali issue. I think some of the stuff that's because like actually a bunch of people have been messaging me the last couple of days. I don't want to get into who, but some of the people that are objecting to it are objecting on religious grounds, which is what we're talking about. So like Megan Basham, I think, like evangelical Protestant influencer. There are some people who are objecting because they just don't like Indians and they're anti-immigration. And a lot of those people, they're not actually Christian. Like a lot of them I know are like atheists or pagans. So they don't really care about the religious thing. It's just an excuse. You know what I'm saying? And then of course there's some people who are just more straightforward anti-immigration. I just want to be clear about that because I think there's a lot of things that are coming in and kind of like mixing together, but they're separable.
Yeah, that's a
So your problem is. Yeah. So I just want to be clear about that. Now, Josiah, you were saying something before.
oh yeah, well, so I was just going to ask because politics. There's the ideal that you want, but then it's also about the messy, trade-offs and choices. So, I was just thinking, if it was a choice between like Vivek and let's say David French, who I think he's a Presbyterian. I think he was a member of the PCA, although he may have left now. I don't know, but anyway, just like certainly a professed Christian or whatnot, but also someone who I don't know your specific views on David French. We could pick someone else if it turns out you do like the guy. But I have my suspicions that you would have some serious disagreements with him on a number of issues. But so if it's a choice between that, I mean, would you like? I could see why you'd say, well, I would prefer to have someone, like Patrick Henry or whoever. But you can't always get what you want. Like, would you say, is it more important to have, someone who shares your Christian faith, even if they deviate in all sorts of ways politically, or would it be better to have someone who, whatever doubts you have about where they're coming from, seems to be more in line with that politically?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really interesting question to talk about. And I'd kind of respond to that almost by dodging the question, but I'm still going to answer it. I'm also just going to, admittedly, I'm going to.
You might have a future in politics yourself.
Right, exactly. So essentially, Pastor Doug Wilson, he was talking about, not on this topic, but he was talking about, his ideal in an interview he did recently. And he said, politics is the art of the possible. And I love that. And so what we have to look at right now is the possible. And the possible is not every single person in Congress within 20 years being a hardcore Christian nationalist Presbyterian. That's not going to happen. It might never happen. Honestly, it's a pretty unrealistic goal. And that honestly wouldn't even be my goal. I want to see, diversity of different Christian denominations within our government. But I think what I would say to that, and it's funny you bring up Joel Webbin because obviously he's a very polarizing figure. He was talking, I do listen to his podcast every now and then. I think he's a bit too racist sometimes, but I also really like a lot of stuff he has to say. And he was talking about how if we end up like what you were just describing, where we have people like David French and they're the ones in power, and the question is, who do you want? Vivek, who's like super right wing, or David French, who's Christian, but like in reality, he's just a leftist. Um, and what I would say to that is, if we elect people like David French in 50 years, and this is what Joe Webben said, in 50 years, we're just going to be right back to where we are right now. Not going to be, there's no actual conservatism happening if we're electing people like David French. And so I think basically they're the same thing, because by electing people like him, right? Because he would not agree with me on these things. Like he would be more than happy to see a bunch of Hindus and Muslims in our government. Um, and so by electing somebody like him, you just return to this. And so there's no difference, in my opinion. They're both the same thing, even though David is a professing Christian.
Okay. Well, I know we're getting short on time, but there was one other kind of semi-divergent topic that I wanted to ask about, and that is, for a long time, um, the general popular view, the conventional wisdom, which I think was also reflected in polling data, is that young people tended to be super liberal, right? And as time went on, they got more and more liberal, and just recently, just over the past 3-4 years almost, it seems like there's been a major shift to the right among the young, particularly young men. I don't know if that's true to your experience or not, but maybe if you just had any thoughts of like, if you agree that that's happening, why do you think that that is happening? And do you think that trend is going to continue, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's happening, and I think it'll continue. However, I'm not sure it'll continue. I think the reason that we're seeing for this is young people always go against authority. I mean, it's just how young people have always been, and the reason that like the millennials are generally right a more liberal generation is because they were raised in like a super hardcore with a, in a not super hardcore but a very conservative establishment, and they kind of had to live under a lot of conservative presidents who maybe not so great if you ask me. But anyways, um, young people are naturally going to resist authority. And right now, we've seen the most politically biased authority ever, at least in terms of public institutions. I speak from firsthand experience. Our public school system is incredibly, incredibly woke, full of propaganda. And it's just like, it's literally something that's designed to piss off a young man. And so naturally, the response to that is going to go as far in the opposite direction to push hard against it. So I think what you see with a lot of young men is, when they're told, when they're being indoctrinated in school, they just naturally push back, and that's why people like Nick Fuentes have been able to gain a bunch of traction. I don't love the guy, but he's been able to gain a bunch of traction because the kids like being racist because everybody above them tells them that racism is really bad. So they're like, okay, racism is great because these people suck and I hate them. And so I think that absolutely there's definitely a rightward shift, especially among the men, because men are going to fight back against authority. They're going to form opinions that resist authority, resist the establishment. And that's kind of why my concern is that Christians aren't really taking our place there, at least true Christians. We have people like Nick Fuentes who profess to be a Christian, and they're gaining massive amount of traction amongst
Did
young
we
people
lose
on the
him?
right because um, he says these very radical things. He still identifies as a Christian. Um, However, like serious, very orthodox, traditional type Christians are kind of struggling to grasp the younger generation because the establishment is so far left that they're going so far to the right. And so, yeah, that's essentially what we're seeing with this younger generation. In terms of the women, I think a lot of them really just don't care. I don't talk to a lot of women, but they are generally more left leaning, just as women tend to be. They are very grasped by abortion politics. They want to just go to college, have a bunch of sex, and that's kind of just what they want to do. And conservative Christians, frankly, are doing everything they can to stop that. And so the women, I think, we're going to see continue to be always as they have been left leaning. And the men, I think, we're going to see some really radical stuff appear as a result of my generation.
Okay. I mean, yeah. Yeah. The whole David Trent thing is interesting because it's like, I guess, like For you, do you think, I guess, like, does political virtue matter? Like, aside from the policies, does it matter to you that, like, if you had, like, how much do you weight? How much do you weight, like, a politician being a good, faithful Christian? Like, would you take a less conservative politician if they were a good, faithful Christian? Does that make sense? Like Donald Trump, for example, we said earlier, not the most practicing of Christians, okay? But a lot of people who are evangelical Christians love him because of his policies. There could be somebody else who's more of a practicing Christian. Um, would you be like, accept, you know, less conservative policies? Because I think of what's going on here, and a question that I have that some people have is, there are these like policies in the world, that we have, um, but then there's salvation, right? Which is that's what religion is for, or that is, you know, Jesus Christ came to provide salvation, and like I don't want to get into the elect issue and predestination because you're
Yeah,
reformed, but you understand what I'm saying. It's about
yeah, keep
soteriology.
going
I just
on.
like I forgot that. I forgot. So it's about soteriology, though, right? Like religion, it's about ultimately it's about soteriology. It's about understanding the way the world is, the order of things. Politics is about this world. It's the muck. It's about taxes. It's about foreign policy. All these other things, right? Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. I weight really like the political their actual faith massively. I mean, I think the question it'd be a case by case basis. Honestly, I'm like, okay, this person maybe professes to be a Christian, probably isn't a Christian, but is super hardcore right wing and is going to get the Christian policies I want across, versus somebody who like probably is a faithful Christian, but in reality is super soft. They're not going to fight hard. They're not going to push for the Christian policies that I want to see. I would vote for the guy who is a professing Christian, but isn't really a Christian pretty clearly, and is going to push for those Christian policies that I want. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, the political environment that we're in is it's going to be short lived. Like that is a dilemma right now, but I don't think it's going to be a dilemma for very long. I think we're going to start to see the left pretty much completely disenfranchise themselves from religion, and like because Joe Biden obviously is like a member of the Catholic Church. We're going to start to see that less and less because the young left is also becoming very radical and they hate religion. They really hate Christianity. They're not going to want to vote for people who are identifying with the church. And we're going to see the right shift towards trying to franchise itself more with religion, I think. Even though we see people like Vivek, they're actually losing traction. They're losing ground. Vivek is being put on blast right now. He would not have been put on blast in the 2024 election for his religion, or at least on the scale that he
Yeah.
is.
What do you? How you gonna? How would you update your views, if at all, if he becomes governor, if he wins?
Like, how would I react to him
I
winning?
mean, yeah, because my question is like, if we have a Hindu governor of Ohio, one of the more populous states, that's a huge precedent. I mean, if you, I mean, and obviously you believe everything is God's will, right? I just wonder like how you would think about this because like what's going on, like I mean, yeah, is this a test? Is this a test of America? Test of the Christian people? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so firstly, I think I'd consider it a judgment. We see a lot in the Old Testament. God sends unworthy rulers to nations who aren't who as punishment. Honestly, we see that in Isaiah where the Bible's talking about God is sending women and young children to rule over the nations, to rule over Israel, in order to kind of punish them because these people aren't in reality the women and the young children are not going to lead them towards victory, lead them towards success. Um, and so that would be my first reaction is like, okay, we really need to seriously fix things in America. Otherwise, we're going to start to see God's wrath kind of ramp up. Like, it starts with that kind of stuff and then it becomes more serious because God is trying to correct us. He's correcting our path. And obviously it's still all part of his sovereign will. Um, and then another way I react to that is I'd be very disappointed in Christians because 64%. we can get anybody who we want elected if Christians unify under this banner of, and obviously like the 64%, it includes a massive range. You have like super liberal left-leaning Christians, especially in a place like Ohio. You're gonna get a bunch of those guys. And then you're gonna get like normie evangelical types, and then you're also gonna have some super far right people. And so that to me, it's a disappointment. It's a failure of the modern church because the modern church has failed to properly educate and shepherd its people in terms of politics and in terms of theology. We kind of see this super lukewarm base level stuff. And the fact that anybody other than somebody who's going to fight for Christianity to the death would be elected in a state that is 64% Christian is absurd to me. But no, they have the majority, a significant majority. So let's say 14% of those people abstain from voting, or 13%, still 51% majority to get whoever Christians want elected. But in reality, they're just too weak. They don't want to fight. A lot of Christians don't want to fight hard on these topics. They don't even care about these topics. They don't even know about these topics. And so that's another major reaction I get out of this is like, okay, the church needs to step up. We need to stop accepting this kind of like semi-serious faith. We need to return to tradition, return to teaching theology, and get involved in politics.
Yeah. I mean, let me just ask you, we're winding now, but like, I am curious, because Josiah asked you, I think just in terms of just the youth and all that, like, and I think you spoke at a Turning Point USA event to, your question to Vivek that kind of went viral. And, the late Charlie Kirk, God rest his soul. Like, I'm not a believer myself, but, obviously I don't want to say that. But he, was an evangelical. I don't think he was a Christian nationalist, depending on how you define it. Like, I mean, I think he just was a Christian nationalist and he scared liberals. But,
Yeah.
it's like that old, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's that definition. But I don't think he had this articulate view that you do. He was non-denominational Protestant in terms of like, his church, but he defended the participation of homosexuals in the conservative movement. You know what I'm saying? Because he's like, well, I'm a Christian and I obviously oppose that, and I want people to not be practice kind of be celibate or whatever. But the reality is we live in the world politics. And Turning Point USA has this huge range of people actually that come to their conferences, from people like Tucker to like normie boomer types, I guess is the way we would say it. And so you're in this milieu. Like, what do you see the whole range, or is it definitely skewed? I mean, probably because who you are, it's going to be skewed a little bit. But I just want to get a general sense of like how people reacted that are just in the Turning Point USA milieu.
Yeah, I mean, the youth reacted like everybody was horrified. To be honest, it was all people were talking about at school, kind of when it happened, and a lot of conservatives definitely got fired up, and I think that's what we're kind of seeing with like Charlie's death. Like, yes, Charlie was a non-denominational, and he was softer on a lot of issues, but towards the end of his life, he became a lot further right. He would have fought for a lot of things that I think would have fallen into the Christian nationalist sphere. It's like, okay, Charlie, why do you think abortion should be illegal? Well, because he knows that murder is wrong due to his biblical convictions. That to me is Christian nationalism. He wants his biblical convictions represented in the law. And so what Charlie kind of served as for a lot of young men is almost a gateway drug to kind of harder, more serious, very, very far right stuff. Because yes, as you said, he appeals to a very wide range of people. It's something he did really, really well. And you got all sorts of people involved with Turning Point and involved with him. And so when you kill somebody like that, somebody is going to take his place, and they're going to have that same wide range of people, but all those people have now shifted to the right as they've seen this kind of moderate guy who appeals to the wide range get killed.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I guess in terms of the future, I mean, you're a bit of a fire and brimstone guy, I will say. But are you pretty optimistic? Are you pretty optimistic? Like, are you feeling the energy?
I'm optimistic. Yeah, I think that there's growth in people who share my beliefs. I think that there's increasing. Whether a lot of people don't see it, I see it because I'm looking out for it. There's been a massive change in the kind of power that people who share my beliefs hold. We like somebody like Pete Hegseth. like he is affiliated and a member of an incredibly like a denomination that a lot of Christians would kind of shun and shrug off. And the fact that he's able to be Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War, whatever, I think that shows the direction that we're heading. So yeah, I'm definitely very optimistic.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess. Well, it's like I know Doug Wilson. Doug Wilson of Moscow, Idaho. By the way, for the people out there who want to Google him, I've listened to Doug Wilson stuff. I've read his stuff actually. I've known Doug Wilson since before you were born. So,
I believe
I'm starting to like imagine this Jeremy Carl future,
it.
and I'm not sure if I'm super excited about it. I'm not gonna lie, but it is what it is. Josiah, yeah, do you have any parting thoughts as we're closing out the conversation?
No, not really. I just want to say that aside from whatever disagreements or other things we might have, I do think you're very articulate, forthright, strident young man, and so I'm glad that you were willing to come on this podcast and kind
Yeah,
of
bro.
expound on your point of view about all this stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks
So
so much for having me on, guys.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. All right. Hopefully, I will see you. I will see you sometime in real life. Whether where we are or where you live. Because as I said at the top of the show, we have met in real life, and enjoyed talking to you. I enjoyed talking to you and your numerous siblings. I mean, your father and mother's little army, little platoon.
Yeah,
It's really great. Yeah, and I'll echo Josiah, like you're articulate, clean, as Biden would say. No,
he might not have even have been born when that happened. So
he doesn't know what we're alluding to,
no,
but
we're talking about.
being old here, we're being old. But no, it was great talking to you. I appreciate the passion, and I like how very forthright and clear your opinions are. I love that stuff. This is how we become better. I think as a nation, as a people, and as individuals, like in the world, engaging with people who are out there and being honest and transparent. And I'm not saying everyone has to be interested in these sorts of topics and be politically active, but it's great that some people are because that's how the body politic moves forward and makes decisions. And I hope the best for you, obviously. And yeah. So it was great talking to you, man. And I will
cool.
I will be seeing you around. I am sure.
Yeah, thank you so much.